things I want to talk to you about that I don't even know where to start.
I had an appointment with you once, and you didn't keep your appointment.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard about that. You run out.
No. The one about you wanted to be a merchant.
Oh,
It's hanging in the hall out there, too.
Well, that's the story I wrote about you. You wanted to be a merchant.
Yeah. You know when you wrote that?
About 1946 or 47?
1946, a little over 25 years ago.
I was going to ask you about that. You told me that when you were the boy riding in on this cotton wagon, that you made up your mind then you wanted to be a merchant. That was before your mother died, wasn't it? That was while you were still living in Tennessee. How old were you about that time, I suppose? I got the negative of that picture yet, too.
You wanted to be a merchant.
That's a great picture.
I read that, and I hadn't read it for a long time until the other day after you called up, and I had an appointment with him. He was going to had an appointment with him to come up to the office. Yes,
Come here.
Come here himself. 9 o'clock in the morning. And the night before they took me in.
You have a way of doing this.
Well, sir, I want you to know I read this, not for the first time, but for the first time in
many years.
20 years.
Is it still pretty accurate?
Yes, sir. It's just very few little
Discrepancies?
discrepancies. Very few. None of them in the mountains. But you talk about going to this cotton wagon to town. Why, you know, most kids, they have their idol, or most usually the school teachers, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I was fortunate, I was unfortunate enough I didn't have a school teacher. But going to town, when you take a load of cotton, and go to the general store, we lived about 8 miles from the river, Mississippi River, Cottonwood Point. And there's a general store there, and the fellow running it, his name was Watson. And I remember him well. I think I'd recognize him today. And he was one of the finest fellows. And he reminded me, I've often said, this girl we used to have out here, Big Springs, Maisie Wilson.
Oh, yeah.
High sales lady. And how she plays up, I've seen it to the children. Customers can come into the store and it's got a little girl leading a little baby. And she brought up there and said, oh, hello, honey, maybe she'll speak to the lady that speaks to the
Primarily talking to the children.
Talking to this little girl. And naturally she tells Mama.
Yeah. Well, that was... Well...
And so, anyway, this fellow Watson was the merchant.
Go ahead.
And he I'm telling you, in my estimation, he was one of the greatest fellows out. He'd give us some of this striped peppermint candy, you know.
You didn't wait until you paid your bill. That's what they used to do on Saturday night, was pay the bill.
Nice.
Then they give you candy.
And to my eye now, that was just about the greatest thing a fellow could be. He was a merchant.
Yeah.
And I did say, oh boy, I sure want to be a merchant. But of course, now really, and then after...
How old were you suppose, at that time? 6, 7 years old?
No, I was about 8 or 9 years
8
old.
or 9 years old. And then your mother died, then you went to Missouri.
No,
we were wrong on that.
my mother and father both died in Missouri.
In Missouri.
And anyway, when I think about merchandise, when I came to Indian Territory, well now, you know, in that part of Tennessee, in Middle Tennessee, where I went back from Missouri, back to Middle Tennessee.
Who did you stay with there?
Huh?
Who did you stay with there?
Well, I went to see my aunt, Aunt Lou. She was, I think Aunt Lou, I guess she was on my father's side. And I got there one evening after I rode horseback with this fellow. I'd been riding race horses, you know, at these county fairs. Hell, I was a jockey. And county fairs was over, and he lived back in Middle Tennessee, and he wanted me to go back with him. He was in a wagon, and he had 3 horses, and I rode one of the horses and led the other 2. Took us 2 weeks to make that trip. Well, that's where all my kinfolks live. And I went to see Aunt Lou, and oh yeah, I'm glad to see you tonight. You know, stayed all night. That's what next month we're off. What are you going to do? Oh, Mother said, well, come see you. But we can't keep you. Now, really, now that's where the Civil War was fought, all along that southern border of Tennessee, you see. And really, at that time...
They just didn't have the money to keep it
No,
out.
we still had meat buried then, you know.
Yeah.
Keep the Yankees from coming down and stealing it. And they can't keep you, so there's no place for you. And the main thing was that the slaves had been taken away from them, and their white children and the white people had never had to work. And a white person that had to work at that time, all through that section of the country, was worse than the Negro, you know.
You poor white guy.
Yeah, he poor white thing.
Yeah.
So I started from there, and I went down to one of my uncles. I think it's Uncle Joe's place. And I walked down there. It's several miles to get down there. And
How old were you now? 10? 11?
I was about 12 then.
About 12. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because that next spring, I came on out to the territory. And then I went down there and same treatment. Now, there's always the wife that did all the talking. Well, what are you going to do? Well, we can't keep you. Well, another child was just another mouse to feed.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah. You told a story to, I think, Roy Stewart, about where was this poor farm that you decided that you weren't going to go to?
That was where I was born. I remember an old Thompson place in West Tennessee, and the poor farm was adjoining our house. Now, the poor farms at that time, they was what the name implied. It was a poor farm. You just went there, but anybody that let any of the people go to the poor farm, now, yeah, that was, they just didn't do anything. It was terrible. And they owned the place.
That's before welfare became respectable.
Oh, they didn't have any welfare, anything. The only thing that the poor farm was setting up, well, it was a highway up on a hill, and those poor old people would come down to the big road and just sit there and see the movers go by, you know.
Yeah.
And that's the poor farm. Now, the poor farm was the worst place you could.
So you made up your mind there that you were never going to be in that.
I never wanted to go to the poor farm.
Was your daddy a farmer?
Huh?
Your daddy was a
sir.
farmer?
We were
You were a farmer?
tenant farmers.
Tenant farmer.
Yes, sir. And I want you to know then, when I came out to Indian Territory, when I left there, well, at first I went down to this uncle's. He didn't want me. Well, I knew some people that lived down on what's called Little Buffalo Creek. And they had some boys about my age. Down there. And I started walking down there to their house. They had this little old gray valise, you know, where And I overtook a wagon. He's hauling stave bolts. Now, stave bolts or stave...
That's for barrels.
Yes. Now,
Yeah.
that used to be a big business.
Yeah.
That's big business 75 years ago. And there's lots of post oak and blackjack there. That part of Tennessee. And he was hauling a load of stave bolts down to the mill for them to make staves out of and make barrels. And I caught up with him. He asked me to ride. I got on the wagon and rode. Where are you going? He go down to the stave mill. I was looking for a job. He said, well, I think you get a job down here. And I rode on down to the stave mill and I got a job. I didn't work there but just a few days or a week until this fellow named Taylor came along. He was a farmer. And he wanted to hire. I was a farmer. I was the first class farmer. $12 a month. Yes.
How much?
$12.
$12 a month.
Yes, sir, and that was a big salary. So,
Board and room.
yes, sir. I slept up in the attic.
Yeah.
Climbed up a ladder. Slept up something. And so I went to work for him, but I made up my mind. Now, I was pretty bitter against the South. I really was. All my people, I was bitter. I was outcast. And because I had to work. And I wanted to leave the country. And the farthest I could go and I'd ever heard of was Indian Territory. And by golly, I made up my mind I was going to Indian Territory.
How did you ever hear about Indian Territory?
From an Uncle Jim. I had a half-uncle, Uncle Jim, had been out to Coal Gate and down in that section and drove back a team of mules. And came back. He was telling about Indian Territory. Oh, and wild stories. But as wild it was, but I wanted to so I was going about it. Well, sir, I looked up and I found out that now there was two towns in it, McAllister, South McAllister and North McAllister. They had just built the Choctaw Railroad from Memphis on.
Did you look it up in a book?
No, I had a map. And I saw South McAllister, Indian Territory. Boy, that's where I'm going. And when I worked for that fellow 2 months.
That's this man Taylor.
Yes, sir. And when I didn't draw a dime. So 2 months was up, and I traded shoes with another boy that worked there, and $1 to boot. And I got an order on the old man for $1, so I had $25 coming. And when I got my pay, I started out afoot. I was 12 miles from town. And I was headed for Indian Territory. Well, anyway, I finally got to Indian Territory, but and coming on the train that night, some old fella asked me where I was going. I said, South McAllister. He said, why don't you go to Holdenville? That's a new government town site. A lot of work going on. Well, that's what I was looking for. So I got
Looking for work at 13.
Yes, sir. And so, by golly, now there's a question whether I was 12 or 13. But my sister says my older sister was dead now. You know, I always said I was a certain age. And she said, Ross, I don't know how old I am. And
So you're older than that?
you're a year older.
Then she thought he was.
Yeah. Anyway, she said I was 13. But I bought my ticket on to Holdenville. And I went and stayed all night at a frame hotel. And got there late in the evening. But I'd never stayed in a hotel. I didn't know anything about it. It was one of these American plans where you're supposed to eat, you know what you pay for it. Just the same. We got up the next morning, I owed them $2, and that was all I had. It was $2, and I think just maybe 2 cents nickel left. And I paid them this $2, and I was broke. But I did have breakfast. I got my breakfast. I told him I had to eat dinner. He said, that's your fault. They took my money and they 50 cents on the thing. So, and then I said, oh no. Well, there was two little stores there, both frame buildings. Just a little old frame building. One of them Kelker Thomas and the other E.J. Scales. And I was there to whole body. I admit I was awesome. I did a good job. One of them said, that store over there wants to start. Well, that's when I went in the store, and old man Neil, some name of Neil, Tom Neil, was manager. This store was owned by Mrs. Scales. Her husband had died about a year and a half before. And he asked him about it. Yes, somebody, but see Mrs. Scales. So Mrs. Scales is up on the hill at the house. And they had a big square colonial house. Except when the town was laid out with the railroad, which was Annie Godley. So I went up there, I remember well. I had a collar coat here that had a collar spring in it. Oh, yes, a collar spring. I told you the lapel.
Yeah.
And I went up and I knocked on the door, and she had the three daughters singing. One of them comes to the door, and so I want to see Miss Scales come in. Big hall, you know. Living room on one side, the parlor on this side. So she sat down, and I sat down, and pretty soon Miss Scales came out. She's a little lady, stooped, had on a real long dress, just almost black, still wearing mourning. You know, we used to wear mourning for a year or two.
Yeah.
And I got up and told her Mr. Neal sent me up there and said she wanted to hire a man. And I remember she just looked up at me and looked up at me. She said, yes. She hung her head and began to shake it. And just shook her head just like this and said, yes, I do. But I wanted a man and not a boy. Well, Mrs. Scales, I can do anything that a man can do. And the only question she asked me that I could have said yes. But I hadn't been to school for 3 years. She said, well, can you drive a team? Sure. We'll go out to the barn, hit up old Jim and Bassett and take the wagon down to the store. But there's nothing said about salaries and anything else. I wasn't interested in me. And we went out, she says, then I'll go out there with you. And she went out there with me and said, now this is old Jim Bassett. That didn't bother me any. Hornets, horses, I've been all my life. And in the front room of where we kept the harness and stuff, there was a little old cot there with a wire bottom, one of these sags down. You ever seen one of those?
Yeah.
There down there. And she says you can sleep on that cot there. And this was the 15th of January. Colder than Billy Hell.
That was just in the barn?
Yes. Oh. She says you can sleep down there.
Did you give you some covers?
There was one or two comforts there. There was an old, thin, kind of a mattress business on it, and then I had these old black cotton, 98-cent comforts on there. But I stayed there after 3 or 4 nights, and I like to post that, and she knew it. And she told me then, said, oh, she could move into the chicken house that was there in the barn lot.
Mm-hmm.
She was testing you. Was she testing you, Mr. Barrow?
Testing? Hell no. She's just telling me. Testing nothing. She said, now, and there's a little room in one end of the house, and the other end of the house was open. The chickens come in there and roosted up on poles. And they had a stove in there, a little old sheet iron stove. Get red hot. You put the wood in the top.
So that way you kept warm the rest of the winter.
Warm.
Now,
And I lived there in that chicken house until 1904.
How long was that?
about almost 6 years.
Almost 6 years that you lived in
Yes.
that chicken house.
And they had a big house. It was on the early part of 1904 that I got to move into the big house. And I never got to eat at the table with the white folks. No, sir.
Because you was a working white folks.
I was and Mrs. Steele was a very fine Southern aristocrat. But she was a Southerner.
But she was nice to you.
She was nice. As far as
Now you ended up buying that scale store, didn't you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I did. I finally worked there, and she told me after a few days that she was going to give me $1 a month. And I worked for a few months, but now I had plenty to eat.
And at least a place to sleep.
Yes, I had a place to sleep and eat, and that was all. Well, I didn't have any clothes, didn't have any money, didn't eat, you work. And finally one day the old lady asked me, it was late in the summer. She asked me, "Oh, you ever been to school?" Well, I haven't been to school for about 3 years. I quit when I was in the field.
That's the first year you were there.
Yeah, first year I was in school.
For something.
Yeah. Well, and there was an old fellow there, come find out later on, and he started a subscription school. And later on, it become, you know what a subscription school is?
Yeah.
Well, it's where the fellow can't get a job doing anything else.
Oh, is that the way it is? Well, I didn't know that. I knew how they financed them, but I didn't know that.
You go down and take her to the and get this kid and this kid, pay something.
First thing you know, you've got an income.
You got an income.
Ross, I don't want to make you wear you out. I think maybe we better break this off and let me come back and see you.
Okay.
When would you?
How about the 4 o'clock in the afternoon fit in your
Yeah, be fine. Maybe 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon?
And they
Yes,
said
sir.
that's probably the best free time he has is 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
All right. I don't want to wear you out because you and I'd sit here and visit for the hour.
Me too. You know, fate has been kind to me.
Yes. But you've made a lot of your own luck. You made a lot of your own luck.
You kind of take and make your own break.
Yeah, you sure do. Well, I want you to.
The reason I got started back in the mercantile business was because that was the first job I got when I got to Indiana. But, I got to tell you this story. This is good. Country boy, you know.
Well,
And I took this team down to the store. Mr. Neal says, "Now take the wagon down to the depot here. We got a mixed car down there with feed and flour. So bring up some flour and some of the shorts and bran and stuff." Okay. Took it down there and went down there. I went up to the window and there's a fellow sitting way back there on the track and there was a bay window right in. He didn't pay attention. I knocked on him and he looked there. "What do you want?" I told him that Mr. Neal said down there asked for some feed and flour. I'll stay at the store. "Well, that car ain't spotted." Well, that didn't mean anything to me. I'd never been on and never seen the one train that runs out there. And he went back work. I knocked again. I said, "Well, Mr. Reynolds wanted me to bring some real flour and some of the feed. He wants some both of them. You go tell Mr. Neal that car ain't spotted yet." I went back to work. And what I had to go back up there. And I told Mr. Neal, I said, "Mr. Neal," he said, "that car ain't spotted." Well, he says, "It's about noontime now, and go feed your team, and then you come back and see it." I said, "Well, what does he mean? That car ain't spotted." The only thing I knew spotted was a hog or a cow. And then he told me it hadn't been spotted on the siding where you could get to it.
located yet,
Yeah. It was down there, but it wasn't spotted.
so you could get the door open.
Yeah, you couldn't get upstairs. Well, that was right.
into the freight hauling business. Well, you and I had gotten to a spot. There was two questions I wanted to ask you. The first place is, did you unload that carload of flour and feed for yourself? You know, you went back home.
Yeah.
But as a 13-year-old, were you able to wrestle those 100-pound bags around?
Yeah. Unloaded, started in the next day.
And unloaded it the next day. In other words, you were doing some pretty heavy work.
Yes, sir. The flour was what we call 48-pound sacks.
Yeah. And the feed, though, was 100 pounds.
100 pounds.
Was 100-pound sacks, as I recall.
Brands or shorts.
That's what it was. The other thing you started to tell me was about this subscription school. I can't even say it. Long in the late summertime, she apparently asked you if you'd ever been to school, and started out then to get you some more education.
Yes, and she paid my tuition.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Happy
birthday, Tony.
Okay.
I'm Tony Thompson.
I'm Gilbert Hill. Nice to see you, Tony. Yeah. She paid your tuition to school.
Yes.
Now you actually probably had gone only through what they call it, the fourth reader at that time, something. I believe that's what you told me.
When I quit school, yes, I was in the fourth reader.
In the fourth reader. And then you picked up there as a 13-year-old boy in this subscription school.
And we studied arithmetic and penmanship and spelling. Different things like that.
That was about all it was.
Yes.
How long did you go to school there?
Oh, as well as I remember, at first I started out at night.
Yeah.
Because it was just the one teacher, the one man.
Yeah.
And I went sometime in the evening. And then she told me I could go in the afternoon. You see, I was doing all the chores at home, like milking, feeding, the horses, and building fires. And the first thing I'd do in the morning, I'd get up, I'd go in, build a fire in the cook stove, and then build a fire in her room, build a fire, and do the chores. And then after they ate breakfast, I'd eat breakfast. I'd take the wagon in down to the store.
Then you worked in the store.
Oh, yes. And then in the store, what I'd do is keep the fire and just do the...
Clean out.
Yeah, clean out around that.
Probably put the stock up.
Finally got to waiting on customers and studying this in Creek language, you know. And pretty soon I could talk Creek better than I could English. Because it was mostly all Indian people.
There weren't very many white people there then.
Not too many.
But you were talking Creek Indian. That's what it was. That was Creek area. Now you told me that you lived in that chicken house until you were 19. About. Now you moved into the big house then. Meanwhile, she must have increased your salary quite a bit, I mean, as you came along.
Well, after I went to school there, and I studied bookkeeping too. That's another thing they taught us, bookkeeping. And when I finished that, why, of course I worked for that time. I was doing anything around there, and course, we handled a few dry goods. And I worked and waited on trade. And all the work. And I do the driving with the scales, especially on Sunday, and quite a few weekdays. With the scales wasn't going where I lived. Just up the buggy, you know. We had a surrey. We had five horses and several cows, and I had a big surrey and
You told me she had 3 daughters. She didn't have any sons, apparently.
she had one son, but he was a drunkard, and the son he didn't stay at home much. And
Is that where you got your fear of alcohol? Was right there, maybe?
well, no. To be honest with you, I never had any money buying whiskey. And every Sunday, of course, I'd have to drive them to church. We go to Indian church there. I'd take them to church, come back, and every Sunday afternoon, wake up I know it was must have been 2 or 3 years after her husband died, that every Sunday afternoon we would go to the cemetery and clean it up and pick it up and keep it. That was every Sunday afternoon. And Sunday night, we'd go to church, have singing in church.
Helen has some pictures out there showing you as that you had played in the band, played the trumpet in the band, and one thing or another. That must have been the school must have got.
All right.
This school must have got pretty big.
No, sir, that was the modern woodwind of the world.
I see. You joined the lodge.
MWA.
And
Modern Woodwind American. I played the trumpet.
where'd you learn that?
Well, sir, after joined this band of modern woodwind. Okay.
His birthday is really wearing you out.
And I played the second cornet and trumpet.
But then there's another.
For some time.
There's another picture there of you in a play of some kind. Was that modern woodman too?
No,